Transformation in Scotland. I co-founded Home Energy Action Lab with those characters over there, wave heel high, and just massive supporters of all the work that Civic Square are doing. But I just want to pick up on what you said. It's been a morning getting here. It's been a bit more than a morning getting here, but yeah, thank you all. You're so welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. So the next 15-20 minutes, we're going to sort of ground you into this space and what we're here for. First thing I'm going to say is drop your shoulders. Drop your shoulders, okay? Because we are not having a corporate conference today, okay? We have done a very mutually supportive occupation of the building centre, including the mutually. John had allowed this to happen. Yeah, and we're going to take you through a little bit of what brought us here, why are we even doing this, what are some of the principles as a community of people coming today that we might want to follow, but most critically, it is not going to be this story, even though certain dynamics, how chairs have to be set up, how a room is, who needs to kind of shuffle everyone on and give some introductions, does replicate lots of stories of hierarchies and being talked at. But we have also tried our absolute best in many different ways to make this whole season of a festival as dynamic, as plural, as multidisciplinary, hands-on, theory, talks, listening, your ability to co-create and add things to the agenda.
Eating
Eating and coffee. You know, we're trying our best within all sorts of different parameters. And actually, it was really important for us to be here today at the building centre because we thought it was really important to bring the energy and the work that we're doing into a different setting and see who and what everybody is doing and how we can come together. So to give you a bit of an idea of like what's going on, we're going to work through a few things. We might do this double act quite a lot today, right? So hopefully either we'll get a TV show that was so good, or you'll be like, thank God it's over. But do just like kind of like humorous, because this is quite nerve-wracking. You know, for me, I find it actually quite hard to be out of our natural settings, organising in different spaces where it's not necessarily the place I might feel as home as possible. So we're going to really try and come together, and we'll talk a little bit about this later, about how we might host today and this story together and this space. So here we go. Retrofit Reimagined 2023 is in partnership with a lot of people. And we could put loads and loads more logos on because the amount of love, energy, care, support, imagination, ideas that have come from the growing ecosystem and ecology of people has been really profound. And thank you to lots of you who just turned up today and was like, is there anything I can do? Because that's absolutely like our vibe, but particularly across ACAN, Anthropocene Architecture School, Built Environment Smarter Transformation, BEST, us guys at Civic Square, Dark Matter Labs, HEAL, Northwest Media Centre, Retrofit Balsall Heath, We Can Make, Zero Carbon House. We've been coming together for lots and lots of different reasons and lots of different drivers to really look at the incredible power of Retrofit as a site of deep reimagination. And we're going across the country, right? So we're based in Ladywood. Some of you might have joined us in that tent in the field last year. I'll show you a bit more about that in a second. But we're doing lots in our home neighbourhood, from supper clubs to design governance for street-based entities with Dark Matter Labs, to practical workshops, trade schools around learning retrofit skills, all the way to some quite deep and transformative work around land, community assets, and the intersection between what it means for neighbourhoods and the people who live in them to be at the forefront of the climate, social and ecological transition. What does it look like if the neighbourhoods we live in and the communities who are there were able to co-design, co-build, co-govern, co-lead the transformations and transitions we need is really at the heart of what we're doing. So that's why we're kind of like this anchor partner in this, not more or less important, but trying to drive a lot of the bringing together of very adjacent and connected ecologies that might not see that immediately that those radical solidarities exist between us. And I'll tell you a tiny bit about our journey of how we got there, and so will Sarah shortly. We've been in Moseley Road Baths, inside a swimming pool, in the heart of Balsall Heath, where Balsall Heath Retrofit have been working with neighbours in their community to retrofit in response to a number of different things, but one of them you will know is this big thing that we keep getting told, that there's a really low uptake. Like, there's a low uptake of retrofit, and it's like, I'm not sure if you work in a neighbourhood there's that much of a low passion for warmer, safer, cheaper to run homes that are easier to live in, better for your health. Better.
It's how we're offering it, right?
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
what we want to talk about.
So you're going to hear lots about this, and we're going to show you a little trailer for what happened in Mersey Road Baths. And today is going to be a journey of that story. So as we go along, all the thoughts, ideas, work that happens here is going to build into a film, into a story, into many different connections and collaborations. And we'll be going to Knoll West Media Centre in Bristol with We Can Make next Friday, the 6th of October. Melissa's there from We Can Make, and Athlin might be Athlin's here. Athlin's at the back. And they're out in the Crescent as well with the front garden retrofit kits and doing lots of amazing work. We'll then be going to Machynlleth in Wales to the Centre for Alternative Technology for a weekend where we take over the town and have lots and lots of things, from things that look like this all the way to loads of practical hands-on bits.
Bring your kids. I'm bringing one of mine. So, it's a family affair.
Yeah. Come talk to us about the ops of that if you'd like. There will be a lot of children there as well. And do you want to say where we're going last?
Yeah, and then really fantastically, we've got the finale. That's how I've been selling it to Glasgow. We've got the finale in Glasgow in a building called Civic House, which is a really poetic place to finish. And it's a community enterprise, and it's a deep retrofit, and it's a really beautiful spot. So we're going to be doing that in collaboration with Best and Anthropocene Architecture School, and the huge richness of wealth of community organisations and the public in Glasgow. So that's going to be great. And I think we're going to have a Kaylee. At the end. Big party. Okay, so come for that. Bring your dancing shoes.
Amazing. So, and the real reason to work like this across ecologies, across the spaces that you might be like, why are they there? Retrofit? No, that's like us over here, and that's not for them over there. What we're trying to do is really blur those boundaries between people who should be working together, who should be thinking together, who should be reimagining.
With clickers that should be working.
Yes.
There we go.
Okay. So I'm going to tell you really quickly how we got here as Civic Square, because some of you will know us as TEDx Brum first, and then Impact Hub. Some of you might be like, oh, they're a group of artists, they're activists, they work in neighbourhoods. Why are they at the middle of this orchestration of retrofit, and what on earth gives them the credibility to talk about reimagination? Well, it really started with and maybe we don't have the credibility, but here we go, taking up space anyway. But it really started with this piece of work from Dark Matter Labs back in 2021, and this moment where that Green Homes grant, loads of money had gone back to government because there was low uptake, nowhere to spend it. And these folks had started to talk about that and why we were thinking about retrofitting to simplistic, house by house, the market will save us all these different things, right? And this just real intuitive feeling. I want to start with that. Where I was like, this doesn't make any flipping sense. What do you mean that there's no uptake? And let's get to the heart of what's happening with retrofit. And then really seeing this piece of work and this systems map, which you don't need to look at all the detail of, but if you do want to talk to folks about this today, there is people here from Dark Matter Labs. And of course, so many of you in the room will bring so much more knowledge to this. So this isn't a piece of truth. It's just a piece of infrastructure to start talking about the complexities and the interdependencies and the entanglements. And particularly, we started to realise, okay, there's many reasons to that low uptake. Some of them are super intuitive, and the closer you are to the problem, the closer you are to the experience, you're like, yeah, I don't understand it. What's in it for me? What the heck is retrofit? How is a piece of insulation or a solar panel going to solve the challenge I've got right now? Or I don't even know. So there are those things. but you start to see there's many different entanglements from across finance, from across governance, from across all of these different layers. And that intuitive piece of like, surely if all the incredible community and neighbourhood organising on the ground and all the things I get to be part of, which is this groundswell of incredible people doing amazing work, if they were activated in this story and they saw Retrofit as a key part and site of imagination and possibility, surely would be in a different place, right? Because we know from history so many times when we need to make large transitions, democratizing as much agency and knowledge to people where they are, such as the neighbourhood GPs to the NHS, or the community libraries to the education system, is the beginning of how a society starts to take ownership for the scale of transformation that is required. So this was like an intuitive thing. I had no right, other than we worked with Dark Matter Labs a fair bit. But we were like, what does this mean? And, you know, through the years, they started to talk about other things. And you might have heard Araceli Camargo's talk last year from Retrofit Reimagined. One, I'd really recommend it. This reframing of this bit of underperforming housing to this, the home, the places where we live, as the start of healing and all things from across health to education. And here's an example where Dark Matter Labs have shown some of the impacts of what happens when that's not true. So I started to really see, like, okay, there's so many people working across mutual aid, across the technical parts of Retrofit, the artists, the activists, the imagination peeps, the peeps working on air quality, the people working on bills, the people working in food banks, the people campaigning for cleaner air. Hold on, there's a whole different story here. And yeah, maybe all of them don't quite yet resonate with 10 grand per home to do 2 or 3 things. But this is a much bigger story than we were currently understanding. So we got right in there, to the point where it became a bit like we became a bit obsessed by the possibility of it. And so I'm not going to talk about it loads today, but this blog was a real key moment as well, because it started to make me realize about the scale of how we were thinking of finance, our inability to prevent so many of those future liabilities, our inability to think about this in a much more imaginative way. And one of the ways we started was to work with DM on that, but also we got organising on our streets to look at what could be different. So in this is what brought us here, and what we took a bit of responsibility and ownership for was starting to galvanise the story of all these other people that we knew needed to be part of this story of Retrofit as a deep site of imagination, transformation, a new social settlement for this country. And there's a few things we'll talk about, but Sarah's going to share a little bit about what sort of got her here as well. And so this is really part of that drop your shoulders moment, okay? It's really about just connecting with us as humans and not some like transactional entity that you're here to consume a festival with.
I still have this like problem where I don't remember when I don't remember when the connection became a thing. It just sort of feels like it always was there, but I'll try. No, can't remember. But I can, I mean, I'm being a bit facetious because it just feels like every part of all of the work and everything that we do at the moment is part of this transformative work. So I am an architect by background. I joined the Architects Climate Action Network when I saw Lauren Shevels in this position at the, sorry Lauren, at Architects Declare, when she stood up and said, I feel like an imposter in the space, but something isn't right, and what can we do as individuals within architecture to actually really grapple with the scale of the problem and the responsibility of the built environment. So that sort of marked the beginning of like my personal journey to say, what can I do? What can I do? So what can I do? What can I do? Very little, but I could do more like this. And that's what ACAN was and has been for me, that sort of formative ideas of, oh, we have a bigger strength together. And we do have a possibility when you come together and recognize that we've got more in common, and actually collectively we have a bigger impact. And we can also share the burden, and I think that's a lot of that. Like ACAN really carried me through what was a very kind of difficult journey. So moving forward, I'm really struggling at the intro. How did we come together? Like, I think it was John Christopher's.
Yeah.
It was John Christopher's. And John's not here. John, God damn it.
Zero
John was
Carbon
here
House.
yesterday. Zero Carbon House, Retrofit Balsall Heath. John actually showed up in Glasgow when we were there doing the COP26 in Glasgow. And John just showed up as this pair of hands in the space saying, do you need chairs moving or what? Little did we know that John actually has this like great brain of things and had built the first zero carbon house in the UK and was doing tours and embedding those principles in his community and setting up these ideas of what if, never mind, what you don't have, this is what we could do collectively. So through John, these relationships were born. John introduced us. And from there, I didn't really need to know very much more about what was happening. And he was like, do you want to, yeah, 100%, I'll do whatever it takes. And so we sort of wove all the different strands together of the people we knew, the people who sort of get this concept of let's work together and let's see what we can bring as a collective, because on our own we're not going to do it. So it's also bringing together the collective of collectives and like really unleashing this power. And for me, I feel really happy and comfortable today. I felt quite anxious yesterday in a different sort of environment, but I feel really comfortable here because I've seen where this has come in a really short space of time. This is like the future of the potential for us to really come together, to be having these questions, to sit with discomfort. You're going to get that today. There's going to be a lot of like moments where you will possibly feel uncomfortable, but like that's where the like magic can come from. That like questioning what we're doing. So I just like would say elevate your gaze away from the immediacy of what you're grappling with on a day-to-day basis in this space, and whether you're involved in the built environment or not, and like let's just like focus on what is it we're actually trying to achieve through all of our work. And don't undervalue the imagination. So I think we've done that in society. We've undervalued the imagination and we've actually quashed it because actually it's a really powerful thing. So if we can minimize the impact of your imagination, then we can control you. So let's not let that happen. And actually all of this comes from just reimagining. Why not? If we're fully creative beings, why not just unleash your creativity and your imagination? And the way I'll stop and pass back to you, Amy, but there was a bit of debate, and there has been a bit of debate in all sorts of kind of conversations around, oh yeah, but retrofit, what does that word mean? It's like so backward looking, and it's so, I don't care what you call it. I don't care. Call it what you like. It's what it means to people. And that's what we have the opportunity to do here. We have the opportunity that when you say retrofit or retrofit reimagined to people, then they can think about the beauty of days like today and the impact that's happened. Like things have happened. I can see people in this room that we've done big pieces of work with in the last 12 months. That just was born out of trust and connection and building those things. So elevate your gaze, trust your imagination, and that's where we will sort of see the magic and the acceleration of this good work happening.
Thank you. And we'll talk a little bit about a few principles of how to do that. And like I said, we're not here for a truth. We're here to organise. We're here to, if you get to the end of the day and you're like, what a load of tosh. Cool, man. Be hard on ideas, be soft on people, have some great coffee, have a few conversations, be glad that you were like, well, I know way better than them, and wander off and go. Like, it's not, we don't have to destroy each other to disagree. And we'll talk a little bit about the principles of that in a second as well.
And I think also, like, if there's something rising, like, in you, trust your gut, right? So if there's a something and you think, hang on, they're all idiots, like, or whatever's happening in the moment, or if you actually have like a real moment of clarity where you can say, oh, but isn't it just, say it, like, and also if you see people around you who need maybe a bit of space to gather their confidence to say a thing, leave space for people to also do that, or encourage it, or tease it out on a one-to-one basis, and maybe offer to use your voice if you're mouthy like me, or if you're like more quiet. So like use each other in a good way.
Yeah, absolutely.
In a good way. So, be kind, be nice. I'm watching this.
So I'm going to speed up because we're running behind a little bit, but we've got a little bit of give, not much. So what we did was turn some of these things into some shifts, because our big what if question at the heart of Civic Square is, what if the climate, social, ecological, economic, all the things you want to say, transition that we need to lead, to steward, to go through, was led, designed, governed, finance stayed with neighbourhoods and the communities that live in them, and we started to put some of these things into some shifts, and we started to get quite pragmatic and intentional about the imagination and seeing what we could do where with lots of different people in loads of different ways. Today is going to be a little sneak in. The 6 sites are more of that, and there's everything from policy to banging furniture kits together. So we don't need to derail one part of the work. If you're like, policy's useless, maybe share those things in a safe and lovely way about what you think's wrong with it, but like, don't go and destroy that bit. Go move to where your spirit takes you, because we really believe at Civic Square, and in the framing you would have seen this, there's a role for everyone in this story, and yet some of us have got lots to unlearn, some of us have got lots to bring up and out, but this isn't a space of like destruction and extractivism. It's a space of generative connections and thinking about retrofit as the heart of a wider social transformation. So last year, many of you walked across the reservoir through the field, and we held this festival in a field in Ladywood. And it really changed the dynamic. Lots of people from London and institutions also came, and by the time they'd finally trekked to this little tent, well, quite a big tent, they were like already in a place where they'd left behind everything. Whereas when you come into somewhere like this, there's a lot of history as power, a lot of what is right, which is the right way to think about something. And that also might bring up things in you. I know in the organising, there's been loads of moments where we've been like, trust ourselves, don't just move into like, this is how you do a conference in a conference centre, but this is how you do it in a swimming pool, which we did last week, or in a field. So this was us last year in the field. There's some beautiful write-ups from Bobby Jewell about it, and we'd love to hear if you came last year and what sort of made you come back again. But also the first session, the first site of Retrofit Reimagined happened in Balsall Heath, which is this Moseley Road Baths, in an old, incredibly important historical building at the heart of an inner city, extremely diverse, intersectional neighbourhood, full of magic.
But empty of water, just in case you thought they were all swimming.
And the festival happened in the swimming pool just before they're about to close, before quite a historic retrofit and reimagination of the site as a deep community asset. And at the heart of the provocations this year is really taking this a bit further, because lots of the provocations last year really looked at this intersection of the reimagination we need to have with materials, with the land under our feet, with the soil under our feet, and the contract of land between us and that soil, each other. And so a lot of this festival is really framed around the intersections of these movements, the intersections of what we need to do, how we can come together, where we might identify ourselves, and you'll be hearing and being hosted by, and hopefully you will contribute to the hosting of lots of spaces around this today, which, if you don't already have, take one of these from me or from one of the team. It will help you navigate the day. Everything is being streamed. Everything is being recorded. This isn't the most transformative room to be in. So if you need to take a step out, go to the Crescent, wander around the gallery, you can watch the content back, have a conversation with someone. It's okay. So here we were last week in the heart of Balsall Heath with an incredible community who have been organising with Zero Carbon House, with Retrofit Balsall Heath, who have gone through the LADS programme. We learnt lots and lots and lots about what worked, what completely didn't, and everyday people from many different... In fact, sorry, let me reverse. What the heck even is everyday people? That is such a ridiculous statement, isn't it? People and neighbours from all across Balsall Heath were talking about the experiences, good and horrendous, about going through that process and really imagining through practice about how they might want to do that differently. And we've got a little video to show you at the end, because you're going to be part of that video today. And this was the community dinner that happened in the evening. So
that's in John Christopher's back garden, the John that we mentioned earlier on. And this is as generous as he is with his garden frequently through the year.
Yeah. And for us, this is what we mean by how we're organising. We're organising in woodlands, in front gardens, in street parties, in school playgrounds, in all sorts of different ways and places. And this is probably the most formal place we've ever done anything in this space. So for us, it's really about grounding it in the ecologies, the neighbourhoods, and with the people for whom we want to work alongside in the transition we want to go through together. So thanks to Healing Justice London, you'll hear some more from Fazana in the first panel. I've just always been astounded by their ability to hold space. And so I was at an event a few weeks ago, because I try and say some of this stuff and then it doesn't quite come out right. And so I thought about what is it that we thought was important, and Fazana so generously shared their beautiful document that really looks at how you hold space. And so we were thinking about like what matters here today. Like, because we have to practice these things, right? The pressure of our work, of how we're supposed to be, how conferences are meant to feel, like it's quite astounding. So here's some of the things that both co-inspired by Healing Justice and some conversations between some of the organisers that we think is a good start. Just like the shifts from before, just like this, should be a ... at the bottom, right? Because you keep building on this. You learn, you make mistakes, you are generous, you forgive, you unlearn together. So this is just a start. So some of the things we'd really appreciate you focusing on today is being hard on ideas and soft on people. I think that's like a good principle to start with. Know when to take up space. So this is a really interesting way to frame it when I heard Fazana first talk about this, which is, as people who may have loads of power in the dominant system, know when it's a good time to step back. As people often marginalised and unheard, know when it's time to roll your shoulders back and try and take up some space, and everything in between about how you help each other with that. And really let's see what happens when we try and start to practice today together how we want to be in this space. You might think something someone's talking about is absolute, like, this has nothing to do with what I want to do. The rule of 2 feet means you can get up respectfully and walk into the next thing. We can be hard on ideas and soft on people, and we can look at how we take up space. Sit in discomfort. There's going to be things that make you uncomfortable today. There might be things that you disagree with, especially given that it isn't just all the technical part of the retrofit built environment world. So it might expand. There might be things we sort of know, but confronting them really in the face is really, really difficult. But explore what that means for you as a space for growth. Explore what that means for you here. Do you need to pop out to the Crescent? Do you want to chat to one of us? Do you want to have a moment to reflect with someone else? Think about what that means and try and really look at ways in which you can bring that forth in here. Co-host a space alongside us. Workshops are going to get full. We've got more sign-ups than the maximum lunch that we've got. If you can see a huge lunch queue and you're like, I can just go to the cafe and buy something. We're not going to point out all the peeps that are here with access fund or support, or for whom this is the first ever time they've been here. So if you know there's a long queue, it looks like food's going to run out, maybe I'll just go to the cafe because I can. And I don't need to be in this food queue, or I can prioritise somebody else. Whatever needs to happen. Something looks like it's about to fall or break. Someone looks a bit scared. Someone's upset. Just help host a space with us. Help the facilitators. Help the workshop leads. Help the building centre staff. Help all the organisers. Let's take collective responsibility and ownership for how everyone has the most safe, enjoyable, expansive, open, joyful, lovely day. Because that will be nice, wouldn't it?
Yeah, give yourself a break. You're not at work. You're here.
Yeah.
Chill.
Fazana always says hydrate. Make sure you hydrate. A lot of these problems are like often stemmed by just dehydrated. So just check that. And the bit about the capacity to grow, these, and this is directly from Healing Justice's document, which is these are ongoing conversations. Not everything will feel resolved or resonate at once. We commit to growing and creating spaces to do so with curiosity, creativity, and making space for non-performative learning. And finally, in that space, I just want to share that another direct quote that I think is just really powerful. which is equity is the opposite of extractivism. How can the learning travel to invest and uplift the most vulnerable and marginalised? And how do we look at what it means to democratise knowledge? And so these are just some principles, okay, to hold us together. You disagree? Come talk to me. Want to add something? Come talk to me. We're really happy to discuss. We're just trying to do everything we can to help you. Just shake it off and have a good day. Thank you, Healing Justice London. And on that note, most importantly, everywhere we've been going, we've been thankfully, due to the really generous and bold support of 30 Percy, been able to offer an access fund to support neighbours from many different parts of the country to travel to other parts. Maybe that's not resonating for you, maybe that's not something you need, but perhaps you're in a knitting group where someone does, perhaps you run something in your community, perhaps there are people for whom you know come into Machynlleth or going up to Scotland or come into the incredible neighbourhood of Knoll West would be really powerful. If that's the case, please do pick up one of these. If you need to support the person to do an online application, maybe take that responsibility. They can also just tick and fill in the back. You can take a photo of that and send it to us. We'll get that process straight away, or very, very soon. And for all the rest of the sites, we'd love for you to bring the people doing the work in your place or in your field that you feel, God, it would have been great if I'd brought that person, but they'd never make it here. So that's one of the things that, if there is more privilege and resource in this room, what do we do with that quite immediately? Not like in a couple of years, but like for the rest of the festival. So on that note, I'm just going to pass over. In fact, no, I'm not going to pass over because I've told you all about this. On that note, I'm just going to share no fires are planned. I mean, no fire drills are planned.
There's definitely no fires planned.
No planned fires. Although, listen, the Crescent occupation...
A fire in your heart. Yeah, okay, let's go there.
No
in your
fire drills are planned.
Definitely not.
And therefore, if there is a fire, alarm, slowing right down. Where's Indy? She's going to be laughing because she's probably thought, can I trust you with the health and safety briefing? She's like, absolutely not. It means it could be real, and so everyone needs to evacuate. The fire exits are on your right and your left, and you move out through those, back out to the Crescent, to the gathering point. The building centre staff have the lead on this. We as event organisers are right behind them, and as a wonderful co-hosted, co-collective space, you're also going to be making sure those who need the most support are able to get out, but also you are able to...
Ooh.
You're
got a little bit... I'm so confused. What time is it?
You're able to exit safely. So on that note, I just want to say, if it gets too much in this room, move to the other spaces. Key blockage points, workshops might get full. Go to the marketplace, go to the Crescent. There might be a moment where you can give up a spot because you've heard from lots of those people before and offer it to someone else. We've got an illustrator. If things are coming up for you, provocations, ideas, please do share them. As I had this wonderful introduction from Melissa this morning to the team behind the project to retrofit empty housing blocks and to train up a retrofit task force directly employed by the council and the change.org petition they have up. If you've got a project you want to share, stick it up, but also get it illustrated, stick it up. And in the later on session, in the afternoon session, I'll ask if you can share a little bit about it, if that's okay. Yeah, that's great. All right, wonderful. Thank you for sharing it. But this is an example of, like, if you hear something great, go get the illustrator to put it up, get anything you can, stick it up, put a bit.ly up, put a website up. Let's really share and co-create like what's already in the room.
One other thing just on this map, we've had actually quite a lot of active feedback about why aren't you in Sheffield, why aren't you in Hull, why aren't you in, and can we do that? We can do that, and actually we would really love, we'll try and capture it somewhere, like pins in a map, of who wants to co-create this next time round. Next year, maybe next time round, so we can actually facilitate this sort of spreading across the country. I'm looking at you because we already had this chat. Yeah. So I think if that's something that we'll try and capture as well, and just let us know. So we'll see what can come of that.
We absolutely want more stewardship, new directions rooted in principles that we'll talk about and hear about more today. So this is not I mean, why aren't we everywhere? Because we're just a bunch of humans. You'll meet most of us today, and at some point you might see us being like quite tired. So this is definitely something that everybody has to take co-stewardship and responsibility for. So on that note, we are going to stop talking. We've taken up quite a bit of space in order to set the terms of the day, to help us to have the best, most safe, joyous, wonderful experience that is rooted in the reality and the scale of the challenges and the opportunities, the imagination, the possibility, the wealth of knowledge here and all across the places that you're from. So please do join us in co-creating that. And while we transfer over to the first part of the day, I'm going to say that the morning session has very purposely been quite heavily curated with talking at you, so that we don't have to be in this room like this too often all day. If that's too much, you can take your laptop and watch the live stream upstairs. You can watch it back afterwards. You can go to the Crescent. You can go make. You can go do. But for the morning, we'd really appreciate those who are in the room to really respect the way that this part of the day has been curated, which is trying to hear from many different people and to frame some big ideas. And on that note, we're going to just say, while we change over, one thing we were interested that you could do while we're just changing over is to turn to someone you don't know, say what brought you here today, and name one thing that you feel like you're going to need to leave at the door to maybe try and participate in a way that just drops your shoulders and opens your heart and mind to what might be possible. And so if you turn and talk to your neighbour for a couple of minutes, we'll be changing over. We're a bit behind, but we'll catch up.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, yeah, introduce yourself. Okay. Okay. Wow. Okay. This is a good sign. This is a good sign. Okay, everyone. Sorry to break up the convos. Sorry to break up the convos. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Sorry to break up the convos. That's a good sign. We've been really nervous. This might absolutely fall flat on its face, where people are like, literally came here to learn how to install a piece of insulation. And you guys are like in imagination land. But the buzz sounds good. This is going to be good. Take this spirit free for the rest of the day. We're going to show a quick video of what happened when we were at Moseley Road Baths. You guys are going to co-create today. And then we're going to go into the first talk of the day, followed by a panel that is going to both provoke and respond to the early provocation and have a conversation. So let's show the video and then we'll get going. Thanks so much. That's just a small start to show the story we're hopefully going to build up about this idea that communities, fields, ecologies, practices, people across disciplines are coming together in ways that isn't in the mainstream gaze. And today's going to be part of that story as well. So a lovely film crew will be around. If you fancy not being in it, please, or not being in any pictures, please go and speak to Bing at the back, who will introduce you also to our photographer and the film crew, and will make sure you aren't in there. So on that note, I'm going to pass over to Indy Johar. He probably doesn't need any introduction, so I'm just going to let him do his own. Thank you so much.
Good morning. To be really honest, it's such a pleasure to start the day listening to Sarah and Emmy and set the tone for what I think is a really important conversation. So firstly, just a big thank you for Sarah and Emmy on building this. And it is really incredible what you guys are doing and how you're creating the context. So thank you. Look, the other context I really want to share is that I think when I was a little bit younger and a little bit naive, I used to sort of kind of go, yeah, we gotta, this is all wrong, this is where we need to go. And I think over the years, I think one of the things I've just realized is that we're all standing on each other's learnings. And actually the privilege of learning, of exploring something and learning something and then sharing it back is really important. And I think I've often been part of misunderstanding even the world around me or the kind of limits around me. So I want to frame this conversation from a kind of, this is what we've been learning. And they may not be right as well, right? I don't hold the gospel on the future. I just hold a perspective, and I think we've got incredible people here today throughout the day, and many of you in the room that will know aspects of this better than I will, almost certainly. But what I hope it does, it sets a frame for a conversation to be had for all of us to get smarter together. So I just want to frame that, and I think it's really important to just acknowledge that we are standing on each other's shoulders in many ways. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to talk about dark matter, actually. I'm kind of what I really want to talk about is what does the future hold, and what do I think? What are we learning about the next 10 years, and what the nature of the next 10 years that we're talking about? One of the things I've just become slightly frustrated by is that people talk about the future as if it's a linear projection of what we've experienced in the last 20 years. And I think it's really delusional. And I'm going to start to show you some of the numbers and some of the things that are actually on the table. And people like Rupert Reed, who I just think extraordinary leaders in the space, who've been telling us for years some of this stuff. And we've not really been listening. And I think there's also a degree of humility that we have to bring to the table to actually listen to some of the people that have been saying this stuff viscerally over the years and putting lives and other forms of sacrifices on the table. So I just think it's really important to start that way. I don't know how many of you can see this. Oh, God, I'm sorry. It's converted to a PDF, which means that the resolution will be really poor. But anyway, look, this is between 2 and 2.5 degrees projected climate change, and it's sort of temperature change. This is outside historical human niche zones, deep red. And what you start to see is vast tracts of the world become deep red by 2070. That means it moves outside historical human niche zones. So when people say, oh, we got 1.2 billion people on the move, what they're referring to is this sort of stuff. Like real structural shifts in the geography of the planet and its capacity to host humans in the way that we're talking about. And I don't think we're quite realizing this is of a greater significance than World War II. Like, we think of World War II as a big thing. This is magnitudes larger than that, and what it will drive to human population movements and vast amounts of stories. And just to give you a horrific, and I'm sorry to start, I will be that sort of slightly depressing guy. Like, if you talk to some of the people that are looking at existential risk and some of the systemic risk, they say there's a likelihood in the next 20 years, a 90% chance we will face a 100 million person event in the next 20 years, where 100 million people will be massively affected by climate breakdown. I think it's really important, from my understanding, to call it climate breakdown rather than climate change. Climate is the idea of predictable weather. If you break climate, you lose the idea of predictable weather. And the loss of predictability of weather has massive implications for the world around us. And then I think it's just like linguistically, you're all hearing this stuff, but people say, you know, we're almost certainly not going to hit 1.5 degrees. Like, that's all, you know, the consensus increasingly. And remember, the IPCC reports are conservative. They're not the kind of even the middle case scenarios, they're the conservative scenarios. And if you talk to many of the people, they say our current policy landscape is likely to hit us at 3 degrees, between 3 degrees to 6 degrees. So if you look at some of the military analysts, they're saying our current policy landscapes probably hit us closer to 6 degrees. 6 degrees, by the way, is not a joke. 6 degrees is perhaps outside human livable environments for most of us, right? Now, language like 3 degrees, you'll hear it all the time. And I'm going to use a session to slightly unpack these conversations. You'll hear language like 3 degrees. What does 3 degrees really mean? 3 degrees global average means 5 degrees land temperature, means closer to 8 degrees in urban environments like Birmingham. So what is a 32-degree temperature, summer temperature, will be closer to 40 degrees, right? Now, this is why these numbers matter, and it also numbers matter for us to understand when people talk about this, what the implications are. Now, let's just also put some things behind that. 3 degrees basically means we lose a global food basket between about 1.7 to 1.9 degrees. The likelihood of losing one of our major food baskets is very high, between 1.7 to 1.9 degrees. We're already projected to lose almost certainly the glaciers in the Alps by 2070. Now, the loss of glaciers in the Alps means we lose predictable water systems, i.e. river systems, which means our agriculture systems become fragile. Right? Now, why I'm saying this is because it is in that context that we're talking about change. And then, you know, at a global level, I mean, I would really recommend Kate Raworth's work on this and how she communicates some of this. But basically, if that's population and carbon emissions and material footprint and GDP, these have all been almost one-to-one. Yes, there's some talk right now that a few countries, about 26 countries, are delaminated from carbon and GDP being one-to-one. But I think if you look at material footprints and other things, they're still pretty closely tied together. So our society, our civilization, has been almost tightly correlated with producing carbon, tightly correlated with that carbon being linked to GDP, and tightly correlated with our material consumption. And what we face is a transformation and a delamination of all of that in a really structural sense. And I think this is also, you know, you get sort of conversations like 2% growth. What does 2% growth mean? That in 25 years, right? That is what it means. Like, these numbers look artificial, small, marginal, but you have to start to understand what the serious implications of it are in terms of scale. Now, I'm going to try to manifest this in our everyday realities. You've got politicians, I've got nothing against them, I'm not going to say anything bad about them, but just you've got politicians who will say, look, we've got a housing crisis in the UK, we need to build 300,000 homes. Another politician will say, no, I'm going to build 350,000 homes. Right? But if you look, the UK is a signatory of the Paris Accord. right? As is pretty much all European countries. If you look at our national carbon budgets, how many homes do you think we can afford to build? It's not quite zero, but it's pretty close. It's about 14,000 homes, right? That's excluding us doing any retrofit, by the way. So if we do any retrofit, we don't have that carbon budget. Now, why I'm saying that is that on one hand, there's a kind of Paris Accords. On the other hand, we have policy around spatial justice, which are just no longer linked together. And so we're having these delusional conversations around actually how do we solve our spatial justice issues with a kind of a framework that is never going to do it because we don't have the national carbon budgets to be able to do that. And I think it's really important to start to have these honest conversations, not to say we still have a spatial justice problem. We need to solve that in a different way. We're not going to be able to solve it by building new homes because we don't have the capacity to be able to do that. So how do we have a new form of spatial justice conversations around that? It becomes really critical. And then I think, again, I'm going to do some of the numbers behind this because I think it's really important for us to ground this stuff. This is embodied carbon. A typical new build is about 800 kilograms of embodied carbon per meter squared. The best low carbon home is 150 kilograms of embodied carbon, right? Because remember, embodied carbon is now important because you can't just say, oh, so the best retrofit, green retrofit house, right, is 125 kilograms per meter squared, the best, right? Deep retrofit. It takes 21 years to make that net zero, i.e. to pull that carbon back out. 21 years. We unfortunately don't have the space to do a carbon volcano and pull it back out of the air. We've lost the time zones for that. Where we need to be is 6.3. That's less than 5% of that embodied carbon. Then if you look at the materiality of that, there are basically about 3 materials that actually work at that landscape level. So I'm not saying this to scare us or to do, what I'm saying this to say, for us to know what we're talking about. Right? So when you say we're going to build a bespoke, this is the best house you can build, pretty much, what you have to do is release a huge amount of carbon then you hope to be able to suck back out. And what the numbers are starting to tell us, and again, I'm open to the numbers being challenged, I'm open to this conversation, right, is that actually our thesis no longer works. And that is problematic. So the other part of it, is that many of us as architects will talk around and say, we're going to do timber, right? Timber construction, we're going to solve this with timber construction. And the things to bear in mind, we need, if we sequester carbon, we need to store that carbon for about 200 years. Right? So now start to think about using your timber and sequestering that carbon for 200 years. It's not that I've just used timber because I've got this little I walked into this hotel in Netherlands and somebody gave me this timber what is it, Wi-Fi wireless card. I was like, what the fuck is this? What's the lifespan of that? And I think we have to be really considerate about this, really deeply considerate. And already we know we don't actually have the timber supply to deal with the demand that we're talking about. That's already on constraint. And remember, this is managed timber that we've got to do. We've got to look at managed timber, i.e. 40-year forests that are being managed and harvested very selectively, and we've got to not deplete our soils, which all of our current monoforestry systems are depleting and destroying fundamental soil systems. Right, here's a sort of simple provocation. How many of you guys are vegan? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, 7. Right, guys. You guys are not Trump, right? You guys are smart, clever, logical people. This is cattle. That is chicken in all the world. That is goats. That's sheep, pigs, horses. That's all the wild animals in the world. All of them. Zebras, elephants, pick whatever you like. We use vast amounts of our soil system to keep this alive and to feed on animals. One of the big challenges we've got is that our food systems are massively destroying, at the heart of destroying our forest systems right now. And the pressure we're putting on our food systems means that also we cannot build the biomaterial economy that most people end up talking about as being the source of our next economy. So I often say this, and I'm not fully vegan either, but I just say this, that you're the smartest kind of data-driven, fact-driven lot in the world, yet we're not able to make the choices that are pretty evidently clean to us. Then there really isn't much of a debate left. And if there was, I mean, yes, you can make a marginal debate on sort of, yes, if it's organic, blah, blah, but actually it's not equitable. We can get nowhere close to it. So why I'm saying this is that I think we've really got to start. And these food systems, without making our food system shift, we can't make our land use shift. And without making the land use shift, we don't get our biomaterial economy that we're going to need in probably 20, 30 years' time. So these things are linked. We're going to see a fundamental shift in our land use. And that's going to be a key part of it. And remember, our land is going to be soil is becoming more fragile as climate change accelerates. So there's double forms of pressure on this system in really hard ways. And then just worth, again, knowing the reality of these conversations. So in 2019 to 2020, 1 year, our global energy demand went up greater than all the installed renewables. The demand in global energy increase was greater than all the installed renewables. Now, why I say that is you often have technologists saying, hey, look at the price of solar. It's doing this. Yeah, it is. But currently, it's just largely replacing, it's basically just dealing with our demand increase. It's not dealing with our baseload energy that we've got. And this is catastrophically large. Now, people, again, I stand on the shoulders of other great people. Listen to people like Nate Higgins, who's a really brilliant thinker on energy systems and the energy crisis that we're facing. Because we're not actually in the middle of truths around this. And if you go to energy ministries now, this is where it starts to get a little bit hopeful. So if you go to Swedish energy ministry, they're saying, look, we don't have enough energy after 2025. We cannot provide it. Right? And then you get people saying, we're going to electrify our cities. Right? That's often the conversation. I'm in Stockholm, many parts of the world. We're going to electrify all our cities and say, that's great. And then say, okay, where's your copper coming from? Now, again, it's all in the nuance here. This is why I'm really going. There is enough copper supply reserves in the world. Yes. Let's assume that's true. However, copper mines take about 10 years to unlock. If you look at our 10-year window where we've got to do most of this work, it isn't available. Second part of the problem is that actually our mining infrastructure is 90% responsible for our ecological destruction right now. So what are we trading here? What are we going to trade as we move from one to the other? And do we have the time space for it? Time is a really key component in our decisions. Not absolute, but the time frames available to us. And I think I'm just saying this because this starts to change, certainly for us, the worldview of what is possible, what is necessary, and what's the sequence of what's necessary. And it's also worth knowing, civilization as a whole is literally a one-to-one correlation, or the complexity of civilization as a whole is a one-to-one correlation with energy. Energy. In 1920s, it would take 1 barrel of oil to unlock 120 barrels of oil. Now, 1 barrel of oil unlocks 7 barrels of oil. So we've already gone through peak energy availability in leverage terms. And now we're having to spend more and more energy to get that quantum of energy out. So we're already in a regressive cycle. And that's really important for us to understand about what this shift starts to look like. And then, again, I just want to keep grounding it. And so I'm going to be that boring guy that's slightly depressing. But this is using Finnish data because it's kind of available. Average Finn, actually it's about 11.5 tons per person, average Finn, of total carbon. This is on the carbon side. This is if you go vegetarian, buy a solar collector, recycle products, use public transport. Can't read that one. Yeah, all the normal things that we talk about. That's what you can do with all the normal things. And why I say that, that's if everyone does that, you still have all those white bits left. And why that's important to say is my number one thing is that we are looking at a substantive transformation of our lives. It is not going to be fixed by putting a solar pump and putting a battery system and an air source heat pump, and we're okay. Just isn't that simple. I wish it were. I wish we could say that, but it isn't that simple. And I'll give you a sort of quote. So this shirt, I don't do expensive shirts. It's about £35, right? It's a shirt. I've worn it. But if you did true cost analysis on social and environmental costs, it's closer to £250 to £450. Not 1.2 factorial. It is significant factorial. Now, that means, so what does that mean? When I bought this shirt for £35, I released into the world somewhere between 215 to £315 of liabilities and losses into the world. I bought it for 35. I released the rest into the world. That release, CO2, environmental damage, soil destruction, is now feedbacking into us. That damage is not ignorable now. That damage is now feedbacking into us. So when we talk about this being a substantive transformation, it's a substantive transformation in how we live. Yeah, these are all the kind of even our most ambitious pledges where they currently take us. Yeah, it's between this is 2.7 to 3.1 degrees in our current policy landscape. But I think there's even other, and that's at the conservative level, what the projections are. So I want to keep framing this. Like, this is again work that we're doing in Denmark. Denmark has already run out of its carbon budgets. Yeah, if I talk to their pension funds, if you look at their total carbon budget, they've already gone. It's already finished. And they still say, oh, we're going to build some real estate. And so where are you building this from? And they are signatories to the Paris Accord. So I'm saying this because I think these conversations are now coming to roost. And one thing I will say that's very hopeful is certainly people like central bankers are starting to understand that this is no longer like a marginal game. This is a game which will destroy financial stability from their perspective. And we're seeing energy ministries start to understand these limits now. So we are seeing these conversations now become material. But I think it's really important that all of us are having these sorts of conversations, not just a few elite in a few elite rooms. Because I think it's in the comprehension of this that we start to understand the scale of what's required. And I think it's really critical that we see carbon and in the context of other things. For me, and this is just my perspective, CO2 is just a symptom. Our release of CO2 is a symptom of a much deeper problem. It's a problem with our relationship with the planet. And our relationship with the planet is based on externalizing vast amounts of sort of pollutants and other things into the world, whether it's toxins or whether biodiversity losses. It's a fundamental misrelationship with the planet. And it was largely ignorable because the planet was relatively infinite for a period in our minds. And now that infiniteness has become a small world scenario where those ignorabilities are no longer there because we're getting feedback. That feedback is social, cultural, weather system breakdown, all these things are feedback. You've all got microplastics inside your bloodstream. Now, I say that, you all know it, you kind of go, yeah, yeah. But that's a function of how we relate to the planet and a function of that relationship. Again, this was reports that you've probably seen. I'm not going to spend so much time on it, but why I say this is these sort of numbers that you often hear, these are manifest in those maps that I showed earlier, because we lose human niche threads. What do they really start to mean? We also are starting to see volatility, and this is, again, goes back to my point. The biggest thing is climate breakdown is loss of predictability. Now, this is where it gets interesting for the finance people in the room, that what that means, the loss of predictability means the loss of insurability. The loss of insurability means the loss of capital markets. Now, you're seeing that already in places like Nova Scotia. You're seeing that where the weather systems have basically meant a house, you cannot get an insurance on a house. You're seeing that in parts of Australia where the insurance on a house, yearly insurance of a house, is over 500,000 Australian dollars. Yearly insurance. Because they're expecting it to burn down pretty much every year. So you're seeing that in places like Florida, and you're seeing that also places like California. So this stuff is now in the system at the macroeconomic level is being understood. Thank you. Is being understood from that lens all the way down, and I think it's really critical for us to recognise that. So, my point: climate breakdown, loss of predictability, loss of insurability, loss of capital markets. Now, why this is important is that this starts to have a different type of conversation with all of our finance people. Fundamentally changes the terms of the games and the nature of the conversation, because that means that actually those markets start to die very quickly. And why I say all this is, I think the big challenge that we've all got is what are our interventions and what is the relevance, strategic relevance to them, to the scale of what we're talking about. Now, my thing here is not to say, I'm not here to sort of say, I'm not here to scare everyone. What I'm here to do is largely to say, look, let us see the challenge and be great enough to rise to the challenge. My biggest worry is people who stand up there. Yesterday I was in a room and somebody was saying, we got this sorted. We could just, technology will do this. My worry was, unfortunately, I wish it was so, but it's not. The numbers aren't taking us there. And they would say, well, at least it's something. And I'm like, no, all it is a delusion till we die. And this is really important. It's a kind of a soft, it's like me giving you, hey, it's going to be all right, knowing that you're going to die. And we're going to be mutually supporting ourselves to that termination. So it is an invitation. This conversation is an invitation to actually operate at the right scale of problem. And we've done things at scales of maybe not the similar magnitude, but we've done things of scales that are outside marginal fixed system markets. Marginal fixed system markets, which I think are really important. So again, if we start to look at what this means, that means that we are going to have to move our economy and society towards intangibles, non-material driven systems. Care, complexity, complex cognition. This thing here, right? This is an experience of human interaction. This will become more valuable. We're going to have to shift our materiality towards massive durability, right? So if you're building a building, you won't build a building out of timber and just say it's timber building, it's fine. You'll say, right, how does a timber building become a 200-year building? And then what's an asset class of a 200-year building where the programs will be different? So it's not a category A office. It's a building that's going to be there for 200 years and the program will evolve. So we have to reimagine the financial asset classes and all those things. We're going to have to build towards a fully biomaterial economy, but that will require us to change our food nutrition systems to be able to unleash that landscape. And that's going to take time. We're going to have to build a new human economy. This work and the brilliant setting of Sarah and Imi, for me, was actually an invitation for us to be all radically human with each other. Because only in that space of radical humanity and discovering that humanity can we build the context and build the shared pathways to work this stuff together. And also with, whether it's AI and all this sort of stuff, it's about unleashing a new humanity. And that humanity is at the center of an embodied intelligence, care, complexity, complex cognition, dialogic. My intelligence is not mine, it's a function of dialogues and readings. It's a relational idea, not a possessive idea. So if we see ourselves from that relational idea, we become a different part. It requires us to understand ourselves differently. I'm really sorry about these graphics. So, for example, Britain is not a boundary. We think of it like that because we conceived of it like that. But Britain is a part of a global knot of flows. We are currently reliant on Kenyan soil. We're currently reliant on South African soil. We're currently reliant on minerals around the world. So how do we operate in care and stewardship of a knot of systems when Britain has to acknowledge its role as being part of a system? We are all parts of that system. Everything I wear is not a function of my local, it's a function of being part of a planetary relationship. How do I embody that? How do I govern into that? How do I actually talk about that? But also remember this, right? We have to get our material economy right? So in this context, we have to get our material economy. Everyone talks about circularity. It's really 4%. Denmark, which is the most advanced circular economy probably still out there, you get better responses in what I would call sort of global south environments. But in the advanced economies, 4%. That's the level of circularity. We have to get to 97. And it's not about scaring us, it's about recognizing the scale of this transformation and how deeply it invites us to be transformed. So a new response is required, and I'm going to sort of speed through this sort of stuff as 2 minutes. Yeah. So Emmy already talked about this. I think we have to recognize the entanglement of value. Again, an underperforming house or a private house which induces costs in terms of actually, whereas air quality, we know air quality, and Centric Lab do some brilliant work around this. A big shout out to them, to my friends there. But like, again, air quality is 5 times worse than indoor air quality is 5 times worse than outdoor air quality. It has massive implications on cognitive performance of children, all sorts of things that are on the table. So how do we start to recognize these entanglements in different formats? How do we start to recognize, do you know why Sheffield chopped down their trees? Do you know why they did it? Accounting. It was accounting that was the basis. Because in terms of trees, their maintenance costs and their insurance costs are known, but the benefits aren't. So what it was cheaper to do was chop down the trees after 10 years and replant some new trees. That's what the council kept saying, but we're going to plant some new trees. And it was like, no, but the benefits of trees really accrue after 40 years. And that's because you don't account for it. You're making maintenance-orientated decisions by a PPP contractor, because that was what they were optimized for. But that's because we don't include, that's why, was it 97% of trees are planted on male trees? Do you know that? That's because, actually, they are lower maintenance. However, they introduce vast amounts of asthma into our system. So they're lower maintenance, but they are higher healthcare costs. So we have to live in a world of entanglements. We know that a tree-lined street will reduce temperatures by 12.5 degrees. We know that's going to be critical in terms of dealing with actually the adaptation of scenarios that we're looking at. So we have to start to reimagine the value of things at a much more structural level. Again, this is just some work that we did around the High Line and other ways of showing some of that stuff. I'm just conscious of time. This is the price of the shirt thing. So, you know when I talked about the 250 shirt? Now imagine the price of a house. If you would do a true cost analysis. I think that's a piece of work we should do. And the reason why I think we should do that piece of work is because it will challenge our idea of how we own and govern this stuff. It will challenge all those ideas. And I think we'll have to start to think more radically about some of this stuff. I'm going to jump through. Yeah, just looking at Emmy. Yeah. So, okay, I'm going to do this. Fine. So, look, I think this is a very draft list that we're running internally. So if we talk about cities and places, we're going to have to start to think about actually not just how we own land, but how we steward land. So if you put plastic grass outside, you've basically, yes, you've reduced your maintenance costs, but you've massively destroyed the ecological systems of that environment, right? You've made that choice. You're killing the soil effectively as well over time. How do you actually build a new type of relationship with owning and stewarding a house, which is outside the possession? Remember, property rights means the right to abuse. To make something property, this is philosophically important. To make something property, I have to turn it and make it a boundary, make it an object. Then I have to be able to enslave it to my needs, i.e. it is dead, it is mine. And then, in that deadness, I can extract what I want. Our theory of property has constructed a worldview that has allowed for the deadening of the world and the extraction of certain things, and that builds a particular type of relationship. So we have to start to think, we're going to have to build shared provisions. Like, it is not, we are more and more going to be living in the use of shared provisions like we had in Victorian areas and other things, because actually it's the most effective way of building those utilities. We're going to have to use our public realm much more as a shared public realm, as a usable environment. We're going to have to talk about architecture not being dominant single-use architecture, but programmable architecture, which changes and evolves over time. We're going to have to talk about, if we're going to build new buildings, it's going to be on rooftops of existing buildings, and they're going to be super lightweight construction, probably textiles and timber in different formats with different forms of usability. We're going to have to reduce, we're going to have to talk about much more tiny homes. I think it's been talked about. It's private sufficiency, public luxury. How do we start to reduce our capacity for material demands? We're going to have to talk about comforts, shifting our theory of comfort from buildings providing comfort to clothes providing comfort, right? We just don't have the materiality to keep massively increasing our material size. Just to give you one thing, like the construction of buildings around us, I was talking to a structural engineer, and Smith's in the room, so I'm going to defer as well to that, but is that our buildings are virtually 90% over-engineered. You could reduce materiality by up to 90% because of actually the standards we've built. So how do we start to think about our material uses in fundamentally different ways? How do you start to shift air quality improvements, reduce light pollution, reduce noise pollution, improve the microbiomes of our environments, new materiality that's required? This is a different urban and architectural future, and it has massive changes. I'm just going to jump through stuff. Okay, and it also requires, one last moment. So it also requires, I think, a different form of relationship with the world around us, right? You're already seeing different forms of relationship with nature. This is, I think, a beautiful quote, right? Indigenous people in Taiwan, what they say about actually their relationship with borrowing the materials from the river to give back. How do we have a different relationship with the world? And I think that's going to be very, very critical. And also our relationship with territory and land might be different. And also, what does that mean for crazy things like embassies of the North Seas, self-sovereignty of the things around us? How do we start to move from a dominant ownership model position to a treaty relationship with the world of things, of human and non-human machine things, but also ecological things? How do we operate in a new theory of governance? How do we start to operate into this whole future? And I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Indy. And the title of that talk was meant to be Why Retrofit Reimagined. And for us, as part of a network of people, the space to frame the challenges is one, to find and to think about the coalitions, the ecologies, the learning, the unlearning, the debate, the critique, the discernment, the deliberation, the action, the practice, that we all have to actually grapple with to be able to, as Indy says, be great enough to rise to that. And so I'm really grateful for that provocation. And Indy's going to co-host now a sort of keynote panel where a number of speakers are going to give a sort of 10-minute provocation from their work, from their perspective, as well as perhaps in response. And again, we're going to keep this as a space of discovery and conversation, not one of absolute truths about any of the things that will be shared. We're really excited about the plurality, how many people come from very different spaces. And I know some of you are really excited to hear from Dr. Leon Saley-Huggins from War on Want, and who's done a lot of work on racial capitalism and colonization and materials. Unfortunately, he's unwell, he's got COVID, and it was hard to beam him in. But we've got a number of materials from his work that we think is very, very linked to this conversation about where we're mining from, where people are moving from, what logics within which we're thinking about the grab of resources, the destabilization and the inequity and injustice and criminality of much of that. So he will share more on that. And this is a moment as all of the people who are on the next panel maybe want to come up. That's Jen and Rupert and Smith and Fazana and Neil to come up, and indeed to come up as well. And to say, lots of things will have come up for you in that. The big one always comes up for me and Indy thrash it out. is how much do we keep holding ourselves to account within that story, which is critical, and how much do we also hold the mega polluters, many other people as part of this story? Like, which bit is about building and proposing and practicing the new world, and which bit is about the active demonstration and opposal and dismantling of structures? And so things will have come up for you. So go back to the guide for today. You'll see later on we've got everything from Centric Lab to Just Stop Oil to Kwejo Twemboa, the housing activists. We've got so many different parts of this story. Don't let it be like, ugh, like it didn't all get resolved in that 30 minutes, so that's it, I'm done. Allow yourself to go, I'm going to go here, I'm going to go there, I'm going to go into land panel, I'm going to go grapple it out about, someone's going to say, aren't they, it's coming up, what about the planning system? Right, Alistair Parvin will be here from Planex, and others working within that. Whatever's like, highlight where you need to go and thrash that out a little bit more in lovely, actually, how can you lovelily thrash? Do whatever, talk about it, discuss, deliberate. Don't let yourself be like, oh, it wasn't enough. And if anyone's worried about timings, we've got more than enough give to pull it back. So we're going to keep the integrity of the 10-minute provocations, Indy, and maybe shorten a little bit the discussion, that's all. Okay. Is that right?
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to straight go to the panelists. These are incredible people. So I would say that, firstly, I'm not going to do introductions because I think we've got limited time. I'd encourage all the panelists to do a brief introduction if you feel necessary, but I think everyone's got names, everyone's got access to Google. Please look them up. They are incredible people. So I'm going to just preface it in that way. I'm going to slightly come in a slightly different order, if that's okay, to this, just because I think there might be a nice flow from that. Rupert, can I come to you first, just because I think you've been so... Smith has to I know. Right, thank you. Yeah, I know. Rupert, there's just Can I come to you first, just because I think you've been so spearheading some of these debates for such a long time and been such a powerful activist in this space, and I just wondered, if I come to you first, and then we'll go to Smith, if that's right.
Well, thanks so much, Indy, for that kind introduction. So I now run a thing called the Climate Majority Project. The basic idea of the Climate Majority Project is there is already a majority of people who are deeply concerned about the kinds of things that Indy's been talking about. But that concern needs to be deepened further, among other things for the reasons that Indy gave. Most people still don't really understand just how bad the situation is. And people need to be helped to handle those difficult truths, because if you just dump them on people, then they just go into despair or cynicism or denial. And people need to be given meaningful, effective ways of acting together with other people, which do not depend on those who have chronically let us down so far, i.e. media, governments, most corporations, etc., but start to step into our own power together. And people need to be given the sense that all of this is already starting to happen and is already emerging, which it is, which is part of what we try to incubate in the Climate Majority Project and collaborate with the people who are doing this stuff already in businesses, in their communities, in churches, and more. And we think that when people are given all of those things, when they are enabled to have their sense of the truth of the situation deepened and helped to handle that truth and given meaningful off-ramps into collective action and helped to understand that this is already happening and that it's going to, for certain, to grow in the coming difficult years. Those are the four central strands of our theory of change. We believe that when all of that happens, then this climate majority can be truly activated and can step into its own power. And that is about the one hope that still exists, that we can avoid civilizational collapse, because that is what we are otherwise very definitely headed for. There is no chance that a radical flank alone, or the activists alone, or technologists alone, etc., can see us through this. It's going to take most people actually being actively on board. And if that sounds unprecedentedly ambitious, it kind of is. It's a bit like wartime mobilization, although as Indy said very clearly, our situation is actually worse than the situation that people faced during the Second World War. But it could happen, or at least we don't know that it couldn't happen. Coming back to where Indy started, the way that I have expressed that in my work is by saying that this civilization is finished, as in my little book called This Civilization is Finished. I'll pass around a copy. And just to explain carefully what I mean by that, I mean it quite literally. This civilization is finished. We cannot go on like this. I'm not saying we are bound to collapse. I am saying that the only way now that we may be able to avoid a kind of set of termination events is by transforming everything in some of the ways that Indy was talking about in his talk. So in no meaningful sense will what comes out the other side be this civilization that we currently have. So this civilization is finished. It will be transformed. It will, for example, be radically relocalized over time, either by way of a more or less deliberate choice or by way of a collapse, or by some combination of the two. And those are the three scenarios that I explore in that book and in a lot of my other work. On hearing Indy's talk, you might be thinking, oh, Christ, it really looks like collapse, doesn't it? I mean, it seems as if we're super fucked. And I think that's exactly right. But again, I want to put that very precisely. It seems as if we're super fucked. That's not the same thing as saying we are for certain super fucked. And as long as you don't know for certain that you're super fucked, it's worth trying not to be super fucked, yeah? And this is the idea behind my participation in this book, which some of you may also be aware of, Deep Adaptation, which I edited with Jem Bendell, who will be known to some of you. I'll pass that one around as well for people's interest. So Jem Bendell, as you may or may not be aware, believes that we definitely are super fucked, and that therefore we have to engage in what he's termed deep adaptation, which means preparing our society for collapse. And my argument is that we don't know for sure that we are. We're headed that way, but we don't know for sure that we are. But that given that we're headed that way, we'd better be prepared for it as part of what we do, right? So everything one does, one has to have, as it were, a side order of deep adaptation in it. It's reckless at this point not to, among other things, prepare for at least potential, probably likely, civilizational collapse. But what I also argue is that we ought to aim still for preventing that. We ought to aim for what I call transformative adaptation. We ought to aim for ending this civilization by way of deliberate, voluntary transformation, rather than undeliberate, involuntary collapse. How do I take us from that into retrofit? Well, it's quite simple, really. What the Ukraine crisis has, I think, started to show to a hell of a lot of people is that really most of the crises that we face that are heading us at the moment towards collapse are thoroughly intertwined. This is what is sometimes meant by the use of the term polycrisis, but I think that term isn't the best term because it makes it kind of sound like you've just got a whole lot of crises and maybe it just happens that they coincide. What I think people are realizing through the Ukraine crisis, and we can help that realization, is that the Ukraine crisis and the energy crisis and the climate crisis and the inequality crisis, these are all basically the same thing, right? And part of the way in which we get to tackle them all simultaneously is by taking something like deep retrofit deeply seriously, to start to remove the power of the oligarchs, to no longer place all of our trust in governments to sort this, because they're plainly not going to do so, to remove the insane situation where at the moment we're doing a hell of a lot of heating the sky, where a third of houses in this country have no loft insulation. A third. I mean, people cannot believe the statistic. It's because most of those properties are rental properties, and there's basically no incentive on the landlord to put insulation in, and the residents will soon be gone, right? So in the Climate Majority Project, we cooperate with wonderful organisations like Retrofit Balsall Heath, who are represented in the exhibition upstairs and who you saw briefly in the film and in one of Indy's slides earlier. And what they are seeking to do is to model, obviously they can't do it at full scale yet, is to model the kind of transformation that is going to be necessary, which is incredibly difficult, and we don't even know how to do all of it yet. And even if we do all of it, as Indy said, we're still headed on the path to collapse unless some other things get able to be transformed a little bit further down the track. But we don't know that that can't happen. So it's worth trying to transform our society and ultimately transform our civilization through initiatives like Retrofit Balsall Heath and many others, even though they're only part of the picture, even though we don't know that they'll get us out of this, because what they will certainly do is tackle those simultaneous crises and is show a model for the kind of thing that needs to happen. And it will start to happen a lot more in the next few years. The government that we have in this country will soon be gone. Within 18 months, we'll have a government which will almost certainly be headed either with or without a full majority by Labour, and things will start to improve. Will things improve enough? No, absolutely nowhere near enough. All of these things are basically certain. So the importance of these kind of community-led initiatives is to do what we can now, because we can wait, is to show and to model what needs to happen so that we influence governments as they start to emerge, and influence also regional and local governments, who will almost certainly become more powerful and important in the years to come, partly because our societies gradually realize that we're ridiculously over-centralized, but partly because as things start to break down, things will start to become more relocalized. Some of you might be thinking, yeah, but isn't there a wonderful way which we might sort of luck out of this a bit? As global climate change kicks in more, temperature's going to be going up in this country. Maybe we're not going to need quite so much insulation years to come. Probably most of you in this room are far too intelligent to think that. But if you are thinking that, let me just say two brief things against it. Firstly, as many of you will be well aware, insulation is important in summer as well as in winter. But secondly, and much more interestingly, as Indy said in his important talk, we do not know the way that climate change, which is actually accurately called climate breakdown, is going to play out. In particular, we do not know that this country is going to get warmer over the next 20 years. Now, that might be surprising to some of you, but one of the biggest threats, just to underscore the sense in which we need to deepen people's understanding of the truth, one of the biggest threats we're now starting to become aware of is that the currents in the North Atlantic are being radically disrupted by all the melting ice in the Arctic. It is quite possible that the AMOC current system, part of which is the Gulf Stream in the North Atlantic, may be seriously disrupted in the next 20 years. It is entirely possible that our climate by 2040 will be cooling significantly rather than warming. And when I say significantly, I mean we could be headed towards a semi-Siberian climate, and it would also incidentally be a much drier climate. The future is very likely to be drier, and that's another thing we have to be prepared for. But what I'm getting at is that one of the key aspects of the way we have to prepare and the way we have to transform is by being open to the possibility that the future will be different to even the current trends that we think can be extrapolated, like a heating world. Yes, the world is going to carry on heating for a long time to come, whatever we do, but it may be that this part of the world starts cooling. Okay, that's really all I wanted to say. I think I've had about my 10 minutes. I'll just leave you with the thought once again that if this is vibing with you, then, well, it's almost certain that you're all part of the climate majority already in some sense. But if, in particular, you want to do something about it beyond what you're already doing, do consider reaching out to me, reaching out to us. Look at the website, climatemajorityproject.com. Look at our partners. Consider whether you want to put yourselves forward for being one of those partners or collaborators. And I'm very delighted to be at this event where it seems like we're having a really open and honest conversation about these crucial matters. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rupert. I'm super delighted. Thank you for that contribution, and thank you for all the work that you do. Smith, I cannot speak more highly of the work that you've done and the journey you've been on, from being an architect to an engineer to leading Bureau Happel's sustainability department, and now sort of CEOing the Green Building Council, and the work that you're doing. I would love to hand over to you. And yeah, what are you thinking? What's your thoughts and how we should be responding to all this?
Thanks, Indy. You'll be pleased to know I wrote Civilization down here as well. And I'm hearing that this civilization is super fucked. But I'm cool with that because I think this civilization is super fucked up. So I'd quite like a new one, actually. Let's have it. I think it can be a lot better. And I think there's something hopeful in that as well. Like, I don't want to carry on like this. I think that we could live in a much more beautiful, loving way. And I'm using the word love more. I've been reading a lot about prehistory recently, and it's all the different kind of civilizations and ways in which we've lived throughout human history. And it's actually making me feel a lot of hope that actually that we're so creative. There's so many different ways that we have lived and can live. And in the grand scheme of things, there's a lot of hope there for me. Maybe. Yeah, I mean, I was roped into this yesterday, because I work upstairs. They said, oh, just come downstairs, it'll be fine. And I wasn't sure what I was going to talk about, but since I took up this post as Chief Exec of UK Green Building Council, and maybe some of my colleagues are in the room, I've been doing a little thing where every Monday morning I write what has been termed a Monday musing, where I basically just write a little bit about something I've been reading at the weekend. I'm in 4 book groups and I have a bit of a problem. I also collect empty boxes. Don't know why. I think it's a prepper thing. So as I was listening, I wanted to just read out like one of the little Monday musings that I've written recently. I wrote this just like for my team. I haven't done anything with it for you all. This is very like raw, but it's something that's been on my mind a lot, I guess. And the reason that this one came up is because we had an all-team meeting where we had climate psychologist Rebecca Nesta come in and talk to us about, you know, the psychology of all of this. Like, we've heard a lot about, you know, how we're seemingly possibly super fucked. And also, I just really love that I get to grow up and just like sweat all the time and get paid for it. It's really fucking great. But you know, I think that's also maybe a little bit therapeutic, right? Like, we need to swear and we need to use proportionate language because we know how like fucking awful it is and terrifying and so on. And so I'm worried about our collective psychology in all of this. And so I wanted to dig into that a little bit more. And so Rebecca Nesta came and she spoke to us all. And one of the things that she talked about was intergenerational trauma and its impact on our ability to tackle the climate crisis. And I was like, ooh. Okay, need to know more about that. And I asked her, like, what can I read? Because, yeah, that's always my question. And she recommended me this essay by Steffi Bednarek. And I read it, and it was amazing. And then in the Monday after that, I wrote this to my team. So, yeah, blah, 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 inspired by our workshop. Yes, recommended this essay, and wow. So, quote, efforts to meet the challenges of climate change need to go beyond a mere reduction in CO2 emissions. They require the maturing of the collective culture into a much larger capacity to process painful experiences whilst holding the interconnected, non-linear complexity of life. That's Steffi Bednarek. And now this is me. I imagine many of us can relate to a feeling I can imagine many of us relate to feeling at a loss that no matter how much information we have about climate change and ecosystem breakdown, humanity fails to take proportionate action. What Bednarek is saying in this essay is that it's no surprise, given what humanity has collectively been through. To tackle the environmental crises, we need to collectively heal from our collective trauma. Oof. She describes trauma response as, quote, an adaptation to overwhelming experiences without recourse to sufficient support, without which traumatic experiences can't be assimilated and are split off in an attempt to numb the wounded part and protect survival. This can appear in the form of deflection, denial, rationalization, fragmentation, dissociation, or numbing. Sound familiar? In times of overwhelm, the brain structure facilitates disconnection, allowing the left brain that perceives things as fixed and known to take over control and perform the tasks of daily life, whilst much of the living system's function of the right hemisphere is suppressed, remaining in survival mode. Now, I just pause a minute. I think that maybe some of the neuroscience has moved on, and the left brain, right brain stuff shouldn't be taken too literally, but I think the point really, really stands. What's Bednarik is emphasizing is that this isn't about individual trauma, where one person might be acting from a survival mode place, but about the way we're collectively actively acting from this place. And there's this really great description of a society dominated by left brain thinking in the essay that's really, really scarily familiar. So she speaks of the original trauma of being disconnected from the rest of nature, layered with colonialism, world wars, nuclear proliferation, systemic impoverishment of huge swathes of society, and the way in which external and environmental factors are passed down the generations through genomes, such that we are all born into a trauma field or traumascape. So it's no surprise that our collectively traumatized humanity is struggling to deal with this huge existential threat. We are in the grips of a collective fight, flight, freeze response. The flight response is linked to anxiety, panic, and hypervigilance. The freeze response shows up in numbing and dissociation, and the fight response can lead to increased aggression, violence, and reactivity. Again, like, it all sounds super familiar, right? On a collective level, different pockets of society will have different coping strategies depending on their resilience and support levels, but a chronically traumatized community is more likely to be reactive rather than responsive. So, again, it sounds like seemingly super fucked. But I found a lot of hope in this because it seems clear to me that just telling people how bad things are isn't working. And so I'm heartened that there's a reason for this and that there's an alternative approach at hand. So Bednarik says, it's not cognition, but relationship, community, and a reconnection with safe belonging that brings healing. I therefore suggest that collective forms of trauma-informed support are needed in order to increase psychological resilience in the population. So this means supporting each other to turn towards and process our collective painful experiences. Importantly, to move past these trauma responses, we need to validate them, thank them for how they've helped us survive in the absence of adequate support, and in this way we can metabolize them and then heal each other and our ecosystems. So I think this is what we're looking at now. We're looking to work together to heal our collective intergenerational trauma. I think shouting at each other and screaming that it's all super fucked is a part of this. And like, please do scream into your pillows at night and collect empty boxes if that makes you feel better. But I don't know why I'm sharing that. But I think that the action that we have to take here, and we've seen it, and what Patrick said, and what Indy said, is like we need to work together really, really differently. And I know that we can, and the Davids have told us that we can. There are so many different ways in which we've worked. There are so many different ways in which we've created festivals like today that are helping us build this. And I really recommend being in loads of book groups and having loads of conversations with loads of different people, and like breaking out of different silos and different places, and that. Then, like, through those conversations, we are already doing that collective healing and building that capacity for us to be able to achieve this change, and so that we can move into a civilization that is not fucked up. And now I have to go.
Thank you so much. Thank you so
sorry.
much for that. And I think Smith, thank you for that contribution, because I think for me, that's what makes Retrofit Reimagined fundamentally different, right? We're not here talking about sort of air source heat pumps and a solar panel solving the world. Actually, what we're building is community and conversations, and I think Imi and many other people in the team have been building the conviviality that's at the center of dealing with that. And I thank you so much for contributing. And we're sorry to see you go. Thank you. Fazana, maybe I can use that as a nice segue to come to you, because Fazana, your work in Healing Justice London has been both extraordinary in terms of its humility, but it's also carefulness. And I think carefulness in terms of language, position, but also understanding this transition in a much, I would say, in that trauma-informed way, but also in a kind of healing-informed way, but also recognizing, I think one of the things that's really important for us to recognize is that many societies and many people, even in this country and around the world, have been living in this trauma for many, many years. Now there is perhaps a new addition, right, that are going to be living in that trauma. So, Fazana, maybe I'd love you to open up and sort of share your perspectives on this and all the great work that you're doing. Thank you.
Can I give you my water? And maybe remind everyone, this is a lot. Like it's not existential, it's visceral. It's in our bodies. So maybe if you've got a drink or something, just take a minute to like replenish your life force. You're also made of water. So yeah, pour in. Thank you, Smith, Amy, Indy, Sarah, because all of you have already touched on what I wanted to touch on, really, which is this deep invitation to be right-sized. We are here in the consequences and the wake of being out of proportional size with planet, with each other, with the more than human. And so really everything that I'm going to speak to is about this, how do we practice moving into becoming right-sized? And that really brings us back to this point Indy made of human. And as humans, anything that we make is fundamentally going to have the contradictions, the complexities, the entanglements, because we are all of those things, like beautifully, stunningly imperfect. And there's something really wonderful about coming into that space and practicing together how we use that humanity, that humanizing to move forward. Just to give you a little context about myself and maybe why I'm sharing and speaking, I'm one of the co-founders and co-directors at Healing Justice London. We work to build community-led health and healing, particularly for marginalised communities who disproportionately are impacted by climate breakdown, all forms of marginalisation, organised abandonment by state infrastructure. And we have three kind of key strategies, or sites of intervention and reimagining, building internal capacity within our communities and ourselves. What are the skills and bandwidths that we need to be able to access the healing and transform our societies? Structural capacity, what is the material infrastructure that we need in order for us to be able to organize and build and thrive and experience flourishing together? And then sustained capacity. We have genius and wisdom, especially those of us who have survived violence and marginalization, because we've already had to practice the act of creativity and survival all the time. And so from that space, how do we sustain our most radical ideas, which are more prone as a result of trauma, oppression, austerity, to break down, to conflict, to becoming fragile? So you'll hear our phrase at Healing Justice London is we create capacity for transformation. A lot of the times we're saying, okay, marginalized communities, people with lived experience, go ahead and self-determine, be sovereign, like have the answers to the solutions, but we're the most capacity depleted, energy depleted, resource depleted. And so our solutions may be there, our strategies might be there, but they are set up to fail. And so really thinking about how do we put it in the right resources for those ideas and solutions to be sustained and to flourish and to be able to exist out loud in the world. I wanted to begin, actually, I am that guy, with a poem by June Jordan, and I always share this because I think it really speaks to what we call life-affirming infrastructure, given that the world is designed against life with capitalism. How do we build infrastructures that are life-affirming and honoring the work of Ruth Wilson Gilmore, who speaks to that. June Jordan, she says, what does it mean to design tables and chairs when we still have knives and forks? What does it mean to design cities so dancing all together will not appear ridiculous or even worse, a special televised event? These designs of revolution require a turning away from the enemy. They require going up the hill, as did Castro, or tuning in to a truly different frequency, as did Elijah, for an actually different world. And this kind of invitation of both, what is the level of critical destruction to the world as it is that is needed, but also creation and connecting to the right relationship, tuning into the frequency of the world that we need to be in order to move. And so at the heart of everything I'm going to be touching on is, what do we know about how we know that as human beings, when we come together, we have the trauma, as Smith Smith pointed to, the ongoing cumulative chronic stress that we're all under, and the kind of the nature in which we act out with one another. How can we sustain the infrastructures, the retrofitting that we want to do, when under pressure, the things that we do is turning on one another? Under pressure, we are punitive. Under pressure, there is power imbalances, which mean there isn't a fair distribution of resources. So how can we practice new ways together? And how, under pressure, in the times that we're living in, might we have the capacity to not be punitive, to not withdraw resources? And where will that capacity come from? And how will that be generated amongst ourselves? And there are different ways that I want to invite into the space. Indy, you already touched on the embodied. Part of the disconnection that we feel is the brutalization as a result of capitalism, which relies on the brutalization of our body, and colonization, the dismemberment, the I think, therefore I am, you're just a mind, and that's where your value is, in the totalizing of rationalization, as opposed to a full being that is in contact and in relationship with its aliveness, with its wholeness. How do we reconnect with this embodied capacity, the soma, which is not just the body, but the mind, soul, land, spirit, all of those things, and it's a living organism that is moving and changing and evolving all the time. And so a key invitation that I want to bring as part of our strategies is we need to be doing this work of embodied transformation. We need to be growing the capacity in ourselves to navigate complexity. How many of us can do that? That's not what we practice. Hold contradictions. We're human beings that I think Annette from Dark Matter Labs once shared this with me. In our current context, every decision we make has a shadow and a light. Those are the options. So how do we hold contradictions and still be human with one another? How do we hold and grow the capacity for the level of precarity and unpredictability that we're navigating and actually already being survived by those that are in the global south, working class, frontline communities? How can that be grown? And that can really be grown in an embodied level within our bodies. A lot of the times when we say capacity, we'll hear this very neoliberalized self-care, like my boundaries. No, the beautiful thing about capacity is it can diminish when there's not enough resource, but it can be grown when it is resourced. And so there's an invitation about how do we move resources to the right spaces so capacity can be grown, and we don't move into this neoliberal individualized sense of self-care or but actually know how to have more bandwidth for complexity, uncertainty, unpredictability, and contradiction. The other thing that I want to, how am I doing for time? Because I'm like 2 minutes? Okay, cool. I want to touch on is the work around grief work. Grief work's been a fundamental part of our work at Healing Justice London. One of the reasons that we work with loss, we know that the world as it is needs to end, but also to know completion. To know, if you want to exit a capitalist society, how do you know when you're full? How do you know when you're nourished? How do you know when it's enough? We live in, and we've been trained and socialized in societies where it's infinite, this premise of infinite accumulation, infinite greed, that there is all of this resource that won't be exhausted. But how do we have a felt sense that I am full? How do we have a felt sense that this is enough? And how can that be known within ourselves and then met when other people don't have enough, and we can extend into that space or share from when we have enough and we don't need more? So grief work, not only as a way to process the loss and the pain of all the different changes that we're going to be going through in the transformation, but also as a way to be skillful around the types of changes that we're going to be experiencing, and to practice a different relational politics to land, to ourselves, to one another. And I was going to say trauma work, but I feel like Smith spoke to that. So maybe I'll pause here, but and kind of really conclude on the point that while we are in these multiple crises, I feel the invitation to rehumanizing, to coming into right size is absolutely one of the most beautiful things that we get to offer one another. We're not walking on earth as gods, but we're treading lightly as stewards, as guests, as travelers. And that's a really wonderful thing to be able to offer one another, to offer each other the spaciousness of being human, the spaciousness of I'm a traveler, I'm a guest, and this invitation to be able to witness one another in that way. For me, that's a really stunning space to be encountering this life and this planet.
Thank you, Fazana. I think it's so important to hear those words, and also because I think one of the things, yes, we are quote unquote fucked. However, I actually also would like to quote Jurassic Park in this moment in time to say, life wants to live. Life wants to live. However, this time, life wants to live because actually we're going to be living in a fork between mutually assured destruction or mutually assured thriving. And that's why, Fazana, I think for me, what you're saying is so important. We're going to have to find a way to support mutually assured thriving for everyone. There is no pathway I see, either in nuclear and into all the kind of soldiers wargaming the future, that a few survive and many don't. That means we have to change our perspective of how we drive that into a genuinely a mutual pathway of thriving. And that requires us to do the human embodied work in a fundamentally different sense of that. So thank you. Yes, thank you. Neil, can I come to you next? That'd be okay. Neil is an extraordinary educator. Neil, you've been building, you're building the London School of Architecture. It's built on great legacy, but also you're building the framework for like the next layers of thinkers, of people who synthesize the future and think about that. Can I come to you to say, how does this reflect back to you in terms of this conversation?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. This is a very beautiful discussion, and I feel very much intellectually at home this morning and this afternoon. So thanks to all those involved in organising it. So as Indy says, I run something called, hello, I run something called the London School of Architecture, which is an amazing community of practitioners and students and learners, collaborators. It's about 10 years old, so still new, still learning and still forming, and I've been leading it for the last 2 years. I'm a historian, not an architect. A historian of architecture and design and the built environment. So I always come at these questions and at these discussions, partly from my with my kind of pragmatic hat on, leading an institution, and then I think the more interesting part of my brain, which is thinking about history, and thinking, I suppose, therefore, about longer trajectories and longer histories and wider context to some of the discussions that we're having, and indeed to some of Indy's provocations and terrifying factorials. One thing that I always think about in these discussions is I suppose it's a little novella. It's a little story, a short story that was published first in serial form, and then altogether in 1892 by William Morris, who, as hopefully you all know, is kind of known as the progenitor of the arts and crafts movement, and who was a radical, who was a romantic socialist, I think also a proto-ecologist, anti-statist, I think someone who presciently speaks to a number of themes which seem to be underpinning this festival. And in this little book called News from Nowhere, with the subtitle Or an Epoch of Rest, which I always think is such a kind of sumptuous subtitle, and definitely kind of resonates with me. I would love an epoch of rest. He describes he's returning from a meeting of the Socialist League in Belsize Park, and takes the tube to Hammersmith, and he gets back to his house in Hammersmith and long story short, falls asleep. And wakes up in, I think it's 2102. Someone might remember this better. And he finds that the future, some distance in the future, looks remarkably like some distance in the past, in which social relations are very, very different. There are different conceptions of value. News from Nowhere always seems to me a kind of radical parable of degrowth. And I mention this, I suppose, for a couple of reasons. First of all, that Morris, writing in the late 19th century, is, of course, also observing a period of crisis, a series of intersecting crises, felt as acutely, perhaps, as we're feeling ours, even if we now know the magnitude of our challenges are so much larger, again, as Indy, I think, set up really nicely. Trying to contend with, trying to understand, trying to respond to these kind of rabid and rapid forms of industrialization, and imagining the kind of societal collapse, civilizational collapse, which Smith and Rupert referred to, and which I also would warmly welcome on some level. And is trying to imagine, therefore, what the future might look like. And it just so happens that the future looks incredibly much like the past. And as he journeys through a very changed London, which has decentralized, which I think you could interpret as biodiverse, he passes one building, which is the Palace of Westminster, which has become a literal shit heap, which is a kind of anti-statist metaphor that change is not necessarily going to happen through the instruments of the nation state, and certainly in Morris's case, the imperial nation state. And he arrives to meet this very old man who remembers what's happened over the preceding 120 years, who's occupying spaces within the British Museum. And the British Museum has also become this kind of ruin, which is a comment on the kind of collapse of the premises and precepts of knowledge sort of born of the Enlightenment. And this is kind of quite an eccentric little book, but I think contains many lessons for us today, number one, but also because it was part of this burgeoning sensibility, intellectual movement, but also practical movement of the arts and crafts, which again I think has resonance with what we're discussing today. It spawned, for example, this kind of revival in the ideal of the simple life. And you get people like the architect and designer C.R. Ashby moving his nascent guild of handicraft from Essex House in the East End of London to Chipping Campden, and trying to imagine what these kind of new social and economic relations between people might look like. It spawns, or is manifested, I should say, in the Garden City movement. And it's also manifested in debates about education, about technical, artisanal, and professional education, in particular through people like William Richard Letherby, one of the founders of the Central School of the Arts and Crafts, and something called the Brixton School of Building, which we now know as CSM and the South Bank University, but which had really radical origins. And I also think that Morris is a kind of proto-decolonial thinker, and as well as an eco-socialist, and I'll come back to that. I suppose what I really wanted to reflect on is the limitations, I suppose, from my point of view, of an architecture school. Our understanding within the space of the architecture school, and I'm generalizing, is limited in terms of understanding industrial organization, industrial capacity, and I think therefore there's a kind of lack of imagination about labor relations, let alone wider socio-economic relations. And I think that we need to kind of get a grip on that if we're going to seek to meet in our small way as educators some of those macro challenges to which people have already referred. I'm also very interested in what I might call the kind of epistemic limitations of existing disciplines and practices. So because I run an architecture school, but I'm not an architect, I consider myself only to have drunk half the Kool-Aid of architecture. And what I mean by that is I am concerned with and about the limitations of certain largely 19th century forms of professionalism, namely architecture, engineering, planning, which came a little bit later. And the fact that a lot of these disciplines, a lot of these ways of knowing and their associated ways of being are bound up in fundamentally colonial attitudes, extractivist attitudes. That doesn't mean that they're entirely irredeemable. That doesn't mean that there's nothing useful in them as disciplines or forms of practice. But it does make me question whether there is radical potential necessarily in their conventions. And so I'm quite interested in what we can do to catalyse change and maybe move beyond those existing disciplines. You know, it's kind of gone from this slightly highfalutin thing about Morris. I'm trying to kind of land in something more rooted and more pragmatic. One of the things that we're thinking very intensely about is pre-university or extra-university education under the title of something that I've been calling Part Zero. And that means a series of outreach programs, and you might expect me to be doing that and to talk about that. They're aimed at young people from underserved and underrepresented communities. But the thing which I think has real potential is a bit of research work that we want to do over the next year, and it would be wonderful to collaborate with some of the people on the program and here on this panel, in which we want to understand not only what are the kind of desirable career routes, but I suppose lifestyles, for want of a better expression. I think perhaps drawing on some of what Farzana was talking about, how we want to live and relate to each other, how you might like to learn, to understand what the industrial and economic need is. As I say, we don't really understand, or we understand in very loose terms, what the kind of existing industrial capacity is, what are the new roles and responsibilities and modes of work going to be, and can we start to ensure that there's a pipeline, for want of a better expression, of amazing, energized, diverse young people engaged in that. And then how can we leverage some of the tools of the neoliberal state, and in particular the planning system, to provide a kind of resource underpinning to allow us to scale and indeed to sustain those programs. And I think that that's a really important bit of work for us to do. It's not about getting lots of young people into architecture. It's about thinking about the intersection of the natural and built environment and all the different roles and responsibilities we're going to need when we undergo this quite profound economic and socioeconomic and sociocultural change. The final thing I did want to say is it's wonderful for me in my position to see some alumni in the audience and some new colleagues on faculty here, but also some of our current students who are not in the room at the moment. I think they're upstairs on our Part 2 architecture program, who have come up with this, I think, amazing idea with the Building Centre about what they call the Healthy Homes Hub, and how we might start to give greater high street presence, I suppose, to some of the ideas and discussions we're having. I think the Building Centre, 90 years old last year, has to reinvent itself to address some of these challenges, and to do so with much greater alacrity than perhaps it is at the moment. And I think there's some amazing ideas our students have come up with, so do please talk to them in the little exhibition site on the ground floor. I probably run over time, so I'll shut up, but very good to see you all. Thank you, Indy.
Thank you, Neil, and thank you for taking us back into history and bringing this back a reflective view. As Polini said, it's an age of kind of philosophers and makers, and being able to do those two things together, I think, is really critical. I'm going to hand over to Jen, but I'm also going to invite the panel to change our seats in this process. If I can, if we could just, that would be great. I would.
I appreciate. I was making it look really weird, but I had a baby 9 months ago, and my postnatal body was just not comfortable at all on the high chair.
We'll follow your lead. So, Jen, it's delighted that you're here, and I think for many of the people in the audience, one thing I would say is Jen is an extraordinary partner in not only Retrofit, Reimagined, but also many other things. And I think what makes Jen and her team extraordinary is not only the care, but also the robustness of that care. And that robustness of care care is, I think, an exemplary type of relationship to not only have the supportive, generative support, but actually be able to have the robustness to be able to actually challenge in a comfortable way. And has been an extraordinary leader in that space, in my view, in terms of being able to drive the conversation forward with vast generosity, but also vast integrity. So, Jen, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you, Indy, and let me also reciprocate and thank you and Imi and the Civic Square and DM teams for your generous, incredible leadership. I'm Jen, so I'm CEO of 30 Percy, and thank you for what you've just told me, but it made me realise I like my organisation a lot, but I work in a sector which is in philanthropy, where I've actually drunk, I think, 0 of the Kool-Aid. Yeah, or maybe a tiny bit, I don't know. I wasn't exactly sure where to take this. I'll go with it. I think it's, I'm actually quite sweary, but I'm not, there's something about my conditioning that means that I can't be sweary right now, but we'll see. I'm going to take it, I think it's a description, but from a slightly different position of the system. I've taken out any of my statistics that were depressing, because I think that was covered earlier. And I'll try and be true also to this sense of standing on others' learnings and credit as much as possible where things that I say come from, so people can actually hear in some cases from them later, which is really great. So on Retrofit, and although I've got this like hefty notebook, I am definitely not a designy person. I am a lawyer and a tax lawyer by training, so there's only words written in here, and sometimes numbers. To use DM language, Retrofit is a real entanglement. It's where people working on climate breakdown, there's this collision between, are we solving a technical problem or are we talking about whole systems, transformation, upheaval, and it really, for me, comes together in Retrofit. It's at the forefront of this new materials economy, and I was reading yesterday about mycelium and their ability to be insulation. That's as technical retrofitty as I'm going to get, but it just sounded incredible, and if there's someone on display here, I'd love to meet it. I think it's also naughty because it speaks to our relationship with our home, and as someone who's been watching far too much BBC couples therapy, that definitely has things to do with our childhood and our childhood experience, as well as intergenerational trauma and conditioning. It's also the place where land and economic justice is so present in everybody's lives. And I think Alistair Parvin's talking later about that. But I think that for people in my position, I'm not my imagination is rubbish. So I actually see it, I find it easier to see the kind of more dystopian view, which is about a flow of capital effectively from government through procurement that just goes straight through our existing systems and out into our privatized ownership infrastructure. Like for me, that feels very real. I think Alistair talked about it in the context of COVID, and when government put money in, a lot of it went to private landlords, and I think with Retrofit something similar is very foreseeable, at least for me. But I also am so grateful for the visionaries in the room and the people who can rethink this deeply and hopefully fairly quickly, who hold visions of commoning, who are getting us to really question what should be subject to a market exchange, and what shouldn't. And again, looking for this talk, I saw that there's a seaweed commons, and that gave me quite a lot of hope and optimism, although I don't know if seaweed is a good material or not, so someone come tell me that later. I've got a lot to learn. Then I wanted to talk a bit about the community and why this scale of the neighbourhood, which has come up, has been so important. And I think it's where you've got this level of complexity. It needs to be rooted. And it seems to me like the most holistic and thoughtful visions are often coming from the people in our communities who are most rooted in local knowledge, most rooted in accountability. So there's a sort of integrity, I think, that comes from taking a very in finance and things, people are obsessed with scale, but this hyper-local scale just feels so precious. from an economic justice point of view as well, given the complexity of our financial web, the street in particular, when you think about it, it makes it more possible to analyse like where capital flows are going already, like who owns their house, who rents. You know, there's so much entanglement there that you start to see when you work at street level, that it just feels quite helpful. And then the other thing is that I shy away a lot from top-down frameworks and modelling, because, you know, as soon as if you're working, and I've learned this from Imi's told me this in no uncertain terms, that when funders or others try and impose these top-down frameworks on organisations working to build trust in communities, that they can very quickly pollute trust-building conversations, because people that work in teams, and maybe actually someone in Civic Square said this to me, like already that relationship that you're building with your neighbour becomes about data that you might need to get from them so that you know whether or not a particular financing model will work, and that polluting is very real. And then on capital, and I think philanthropy obviously has a historic context here. I personally work for a foundation that is funded through the marketisation and privatisation of security, and also the exit of a cleaning products business that would have been incredible if it could have been held and owned in a commons. So we are working to change the systems, the economic systems that philanthropy has been born from. And when we're doing that, we're in between worlds. And I wanted to bring that because on the one hand, we can see the world of like abundant leadership and yet scarcity of resources, where, you know, organisations are having to scrap, to also being very proximate to the world of private wealth and private capital at the minute, which has an abundance of resources but not enough leadership, and where it's almost extremely the opposite. It's almost like, particularly in venture spaces, there's almost too much capital for investable companies effectively that are coming through, and it's incredibly frustrating. And the other perspective on that as well is that within these private wealth systems that close up, I guess we see very clearly, they feel very locked. This is the most depressing bit, I think. They feel very locked into a specific way of thinking, which, you know, is based on capital growth rather than capital resilience, let alone community resilience, let alone the donut. It feels very far removed. And also, someone referred to it the other day as the house of finance, which I thought was a good pun. But actually, the layers of governance that sit, and I really worry when I see things that say, oh, this will be public money and then this will be private capital. Like, you see it so much. Let me just demystify. Private capital is layers and layers and layers of boards that become increasingly detached, like the further up you go. And sometimes it needs to even be said out loud, like the board of a trust company delegates to a family office, which has a board, which has an investment committee, which delegates to several probably asset investment advisors that have boards, that have investment committees, that invest in funds, that have boards, investment committees, that themselves will often then invest in funds which have boards, investment committees, which will then invest perhaps in a business, or maybe something that's like synthetic and not even businessy. And that, for me, that house of capital, and those layers are held in place by governance systems where people who are often fair-minded but showing up in these systems and performing, you know, there's so much unlearning and work that needs to happen there. That was the most depressing bit. And then I guess as a philanthropy, and I won't spend too long on this because we don't necessarily feel we sit with a lot of the answers, but it's in some ways we're operating in two sites, working a little bit with our methodologies, but in a fairly light touch way, so we're not imposing too much, is to unlock capital and get it out to people who are leading in this moment, and then also do a bit of work up in that site of private wealth to try and introduce new investment logics that are based on some of the things that Fazana was talking about, and the donut as well. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to come to the audience for a couple of questions. One thing I was going to say, Jen, was that even allowing ourselves to use the words of public and private gives permission to the illusion that there is somehow private wealth when we know it's increasingly entangled.
Yes.
We're locked into these paradigms that reinforce these illusions, which benefits a few, right? Just because it's kind of extraordinary, these languages that are embedded into us and we replicate out. So yeah, thank you, Jen, very much for that. So I'm going to come quickly. Are there a couple of hands? Come on, this has not been much.
It's been quite a long stint, I think.
Yeah. One, I'm going to walk around. Second, right, two corners. I'm going to take both questions quickly, and then we're going to, because it's been a long stint.
I don't have a question. I just want to say huge thanks. And I've been sitting here on the border of tears, just really grateful for feeling slightly less alone. So yesterday I went to the AJ Retrofit conference, which was actually deeply uplifting, but sitting very much within that canon that you've all been critiquing. And yeah, I just feel like the need to take a moment to say thank you.
Hey, how are you doing?
Sorry, I'm just wondering why you use the word fucked a lot and extremely fucked and stuff like that. I'm just wondering, have you been following Kim Anami on Instagram or anything like that? Because it's unusual to use that. But my actual contribution is around the spiritual side of things and the aspect of that and people like Amilcar Cabral and their importance around revolution and decolonising processes.
I'm one of the guilty with the swearing. I'm kind of with Smith on this. I think one of the things that I learned from my role in Extinction Rebellion and from watching my young friend storm the world, Greta Thunberg, is that there is a genuine premium in our world today on authenticity, and if we manage to tell the truth authentically, even when it's difficult, and provide those kind of contexts I described for holding that truth, that has incredible power to cut through. And I really believe that we've only just begun to understand and reckon with that power. That's one of the things that gives me profound hope and excitement. And one aspect of that sometimes is to just swear when that seems like the right thing to do. I don't know if anyone's reading Stephen Markley's incredible 1,000-page novel, The Deluge, about our possible climate futures. He imagines a woman in that who is going to try to, and to some extent succeed in transforming American politics, who takes this to another level and just she does a lot of swearing on TV and so on, and it really cuts through. And maybe I've been a bit inspired by her. On spirituality, totally agreed. The civilizational crisis is, among other things, a spiritual crisis. If we get through it, it will be partly because of new and larger spiritual frameworks and traditions. And another thing that really excites me is that they are coming, and to some extent they're already here. A really good book on this is Dark Green Religion by Bron Taylor. Again, an extraordinarily hopeful book because he helps you to understand how the new eco-spirituality that we need, which is also old, is already emerging.
I didn't swear today, but I can promise you every single day, at least once, I will say the fuckery of it all. It just like comes out of my body because I think it's the appropriate response. I just was fundamentally agreeing with you that there is a spiritual reckoning happening. My background has been over the last kind of near 2 decades around forms of violence, poverty, class violence, gender and sexual violence, and also around racialized violence. And at the heart of all forms of violence is disconnection. That is what violence is. All forms of violence are disconnection. And so we're being invited to levels of connection that through colonization, capitalism, neoliberalism, just continually is perpetuated. And I think that in order for the times in which we're living in, we're not actually needing to look towards New Age kind of spiritualities or New Age kind of logics around how we move, but it is a Hanikwen elder, indigenous elder from the Brazilian Amazon, had said that the future is ancestral, and what we're actually looking to is the deep remembrance and the deep reparative work towards our traditions, our lineages, our indigeneity, which is everywhere, like all of us have that. And in order to do this work right now, we also have to go straight to source. Like, the rigor of this time requires us to access a level of capacity and training, militancy sometimes, to transition. And the space that we're going to get the restoration, the supply, the sustenance, isn't going to come from our minds. It might not even come from our bodies, but it will come from the land. It will come from source. So an invitation for all of us who are committed to this deep transition is, where are you practicing getting connected to connection to source in order to be able to sustain the level of rigor that is required for this time, and zeal. And that can be anything. It can be spirit for you, it can be God, it can be whatever it is, but going to that space to access the supply, but also the clarity of vision. For me, it's not about imagination, it's about vision. Like, how are we visioning in this time and accessing and time traveling to be able to move towards the world that is already here but needs to be unveiled. And I think a lot of the visionaries that are around us know that, access that, and tune in, as did Elijah when he tuned into that frequency. I'll hand it.
Thank you. And I think, building on that, I think it's very clear, like stuff like our language structures, which are noun orientated, or classification, right? Classification theory was a permission for violence, when we actually, classification theory was at the heart of the racialization that we've seen, and it created the landscape for violence. Objecthood, subjecthood, perspective. These things were tools of power, and they've become so normalized in our worldview that they've created the violence that we talk about in that everyday sense. So it's all this invisible stuff that has actually created that permission landscape, which I think is really, really important for us to keep remembering. I'm going to quickly go to the panelists to say, we've got a brilliant day coming forward. What would be your hopes for the day, and some hopes that we can all sort of participate in? And maybe one reflection, if you have, of this conversation that we've had in that. But just sort of briefly.
I'll just say that I would love it if people could see Retrofit, among other things, in the kind of context that I try to lay out, as an emerging each way bet on collapse and non-collapse, on something that it makes sense to try to do, whatever the future ends up holding.
What was the second bit, Indy? So I think the thing to keep hold of is, I love the start of the day with Imi and, as it's Sarah, and how that ethos that they kind of kicked off with, which felt very unconferencey. Be nice to keep that going. And I always just sit, when people can sit here and speak as eloquently and beautifully as fellow panelists have done, it always just gives me energy and hope.
Hope for today is that there's a kind of multiplicity of approaches and ideas, all kind of held together by an overarching frame. I think the tendency to think in grand universals responding to some of these crises is very easy, but we have to remember that it was partly that sense of universality which got us into this mess in the first place. And no particular reflections from the panel, except that I feel I've learned a lot and written lots of things to read down, so thank you very much.
Staying with contradiction is an act of expansion, because you're holding more than less, and just really also appreciating the point Indy, you made a back of Jen around private, the entanglements around private and public, because it's just super present. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Look, can I ask us to firstly, we're going to, would it be okay if we close this? I think, yeah. So what I'm going to ask us to do, firstly, I want us, the panelists, to thank actually everyone else in the room for being here and listening and being part of this conversation. And I know it's been a bit of lots of information, but I would like to firstly extend our thanks to you and being part of this. Because I think it's really important, right? This is actually genuinely a dialogue, and it will become a dialogue over that day. Second, if you wouldn't mind, if you'd give thanks to the panelists who've just been extraordinary as well. Thank you.
Can we give a big thank you to Indy as well for I don't know if I was about to start singing Take Me to Church then, but what I wanted to say was, on behalf of Sarah and I is just going to close. We're not going to talk to you for ages, just give us 2 more seconds. As part of 2 months of activity, that big expanded amount of talking was really deliberate. It wasn't like because we don't know, how to do different types of spaces. It was deliberate because this is being live streamed, it's being recorded, because we felt the building centre and the audience that would come here would appreciate the connection and the taking us to another place. And so we're really grateful for everyone who's been patient and sat through that. Through the next rest of the day, I just want to say 3 practical things, and I'll hand over to Sarah to also close off. 1, lunch is out there. When you get it, go upstairs, please. 2, the incredible team behind Power, Power Street, many of you might have seen in The Guardian, in Walthamstow, Dan Edelstein and Hilary Powell, are doing amazing things alongside We Can Make and a climate confession booth, which Sarah will tell you more about, in the Crescent. Go out, get fresh air, eat, have some jokes, tell the people who are walking past what's going on, and really sort of break out of the inside space. In the afternoon, when you come back, there will be land and people provocations. This room will be split in 2. One will be in one will be in another. We're going to get a quick show of hands about where you're thinking. And the materials one will be upstairs at the back of the gallery. And the Retrofit Marketplace will be open all afternoon. And people from those projects, many of them are there, so you can go and talk to them. And then you can go and shake off again. And you can, if you're like, shit, I should have told my neighbour to come to this. The 4 till 7 block is a block of all sorts of justice meets activism meets spatial justice meets all sorts of absolute magic until between 4 and 7. So that's how to navigate the rest of the day. We are not all going to be together again now. This is it. We now go off, unconference. We go live the principles and practices of how to hold together. We go and have the conversations we want to. We go make the connections. We go tell our friends. We go talk to people on the street. We go say hey to the team. We go meet other people. And I just want to say a huge thank you to that morning bit, because it's a real risk doing this festival and then bringing together the conversation, and people are just like literally just want to know about insulation. So I'm really grateful. I mean, you probably would have read the framing, right? And you probably would have known that's not what we're going to focus on today. Although Sarah knows a lot about it, right? So please do also go and talk to her and Charlie and many others. But I just want to say a huge thank you. This has been really amazing morning. I'm very grateful, and I'll hand over to you.
So just to follow on from some of the practical bits, there's 2 heroes out in the Crescent building the confession booth. It's a climate confession booth. It's made from U-build plywood boxes. The whole idea is that it's stuff that you can build as a person. I can see Tom Bennett over there. There's a wave, Tom. Tom knows all about it. We'd really love it if you could just go out and help them, because I've gone out and said, you can just abandon this and come inside and listen to the chat, but they're out there determined to build a thing. But it might help if there was a few more pairs of hands just out there to get that up. And then go deep and confess your climate sins. It's just a way to bring forward some of the things that we're all probably feeling. So you can go and you can pin pin them all over the confession booth, but just like be part of like creating that. You can also build the furniture, the Retrofit front garden toolkit with We Can Make. You can build stuff, and then you can talk to them about how you can do that and bring that to your neighborhood as well. So there's some really practical things, just like if you want to shake off the weight of the morning, and go out and just like build some stuff, go and just do that. And yeah, come back to us when you're ready. I don't think we'll take do we want a show of hands for who might want to come?
Oh, yeah, sorry. We will try to start back on time at 2:30. It doesn't matter if you've not committed yet, but just because we need to figure out how to split up the rooms.
This room won't be split this way. It'll be split asymmetrically.
Could you raise your hand if you're likely to go to the land one? Excellent. Could you raise your hand if you're likely to go to the people one? Excellent.
God damn
Could you raise your hand if you're likely to go to the materials one? Oh, excellent. How we've got the rooms split up. Oh, God, we know each other. We've got the room split up perfectly right. You're not bound to that. Law of 2 feet, connect, conversations, all chilled. But just that's good for us to know for rooms. Great. Have a wonderful lunch.
Thank you. Enjoy your lunch.
Thank you so much for the morning. Bye, everyone.
Have my books made it round the room? Okay.
Are you selling your books today, Rupert?
Yeah.
You are? Okay. Well, we'd love to buy a bunch.
Okay, great. Yeah.